All right, welcome. Here we go. Hiring managers is what we're talking about today in CATS. And, again, off the bat, I just wanted to reiterate hiring managers within CATS are used on the HR version of our software. Way back when you signed up, based off of the hiring that you do, is the version of CATS that you're on. So we will talk about that. We will talk about how you know which version of the software that you're on. Just know that what we're going to talk about today, if you are on the third party, the recruiting version of the software, a lot of what we talk about is not going to apply for you. However, when we do talk about submittals, reviews, things of that nature, there is some overlap. So it's not a complete wash. But again, kind of the focus for today is on hiring managers, adding those users, utilizing them, and the majority of that is going to be with the HR side of the CATS platform. All right, so for today, again, we're going to talk about it ad nauseum, but we'll talk about who has access to hiring managers. We'll talk about how to add them into your system. The big ones are going to be, okay, what do they do? What do they see? We're also going to talk about, okay, we've got the hiring managers in the system. We've got a good feel for kind of what they can do. How do we set it up so that we can start utilizing these people? As I'm walking candidates through my workflow, they reach a certain point in my hiring process where I want those hiring managers to review, to give feedback on the candidates. Sounds great, but how do I do it? So we'll definitely dig into that, as well as jobs. So you can create jobs in your system, and those who have taken a little bit more of a deep dive into CATS know that as a part of your job creation process, you can set your jobs in a state where they're also out for review. So we'll kind of talk about that as well. And then after the fact, after the candidate is submitted, we're going to receive the feedback, but where can I go back into the system and view that? What did they say? What did they like? What did they not like? What was their decision? That's all recorded in the software, and we'll talk about where that is viewed. All right, so here we go. Who has access to hiring managers? Again, I'll repeat myself several times. I apologize in advance. This is only going to be companies that are on the HR version of CATS. And the easiest way to know if you're on the HR version, take a look in your navigation panel over on the left where it says like dashboard, it says activities. HR only has jobs and candidates. So you won't see company or contact records listed in the HR version. So if it says contacts, if it says companies over there, you're more than likely in the third party, the recruiter, the agency version, and so hiring managers won't really apply to you. Typically, it's not negotiable as far as like what version you're on. Just the third parties that we partner with, want to make sure that third party hiring is over here. The HR direct hires are sort of in this bucket. So if you have any questions on that, let us know. Reach out. Our support team can get you pointed in the right direction. And of course, we'll talk about how to reach out to us there. A couple other notes on the hiring managers, who has access to them. Again, we sort of talked about HR companies. If you're on that HR version, your jobs are generally considered to be internal direct hire positions. As far as how many you can utilize, for each full user that you have in your system, you're allotted 5 hiring managers at no cost. So if I have one sort of full user in my system, they can log in, they can view everything, they can move candidates through the workflow, I can have 5 hiring managers as well at no cost. If I have 2 users, I can have 10 hiring managers, etc. If, let's say I've got 2 full users in my system, but I want to use a dozen hiring managers, that goes over your limit of 10. In that case, we typically recommend just kind of adding an additional user, kind of like a placeholder user, so that basically you have the capacity for an extra 5 hiring managers. Again, at any point, feel free to reach out to our support team. We can kind of walk you through, best way to maybe to handle some of these situations. Sometimes maybe it's like, okay, well, I need a dozen, but 3 of these people haven't logged in a year, so I can just sort of switch their seats over, right? And that'll bring my number back to what I'm looking to do. So that's kind of the general idea of who has access to hiring managers and kind of the capacity at which they can be added into the system. And let me back it up here. So let's talk about adding those users into the system. So I'm going to stop the share here for just a moment, and we're going to hop over into Cats. And that's the thing with this hiring manager thing. It's a lot of hopping back and forth. I am much more of a, I would rather show in addition to tell. But doing so, it kind of takes a little bit of maneuvering within the system. So this is always kind of a tricky one to talk about. That's why we wanted to do this webinar. That's why we wanted to record this webinar so we can show folks later on as well. All right, so I am logged in as an admin, just kind of on a test site that we have here. If I want to add a hiring manager into my system, again, check over here. I've only got jobs and candidates before it hops over into calendar. That lets me know I'm in the HR version of the software. Also, if I hit on settings, I go to user management. Here's where I will see, and let me maybe blow this up a little bit. So here's where I'll see my options to add a user or to add a hiring manager. Again, so in this space, adding a user, that's going to be full on, either 99 bucks a month, or you're going to pay for the rest of the year depending on what plan you're on. That's a full user in the system. Whereas a hiring manager, no cost, you can have up to 5 per full user in your system. So to add them into your CAT system, click the button that says add hiring manager, and it's very, very, very similar to what you would see if you were using, if you're adding just kind of a standard user. Punch in their name, punch in their email, and you're pretty much good to go. You can set a password for them. Otherwise, just send them a link via email to set a password, and you're good to go. So that is how you add a hiring manager into the system. And again, at any point, if you hit settings, user management, all your users you'll be able to see, and you'll also see sort of in that access level column whether or not they're sort of a full user or they're a hiring manager. All right, so we've talked about them. We've talked about how to add them. What can they do? So hiring managers, they come at no cost because what they can do in the system is pretty limited. But again, this is by design. They exist to review candidates or jobs, or both, that are sent to them via a workflow trigger. So again, either I create a job and I say, okay, it's been created, but I want to make sure it gets approval from whomever before it goes live. That's the thing that you can do within CATS. We'll take a look. Let's say I am hiring, I'm reviewing candidates. I set them up for a phone screen. And at this point I say, yep, looks good. We're going to go ahead and move them forward. We're going to submit them to whoever my hiring manager is for this job. That's what happens as well. Hiring manager, and again, we'll talk about this. I'll show you all of this. Receives an email. They click a link to log in. They review the candidate's resume. They can leave notes, and they make their decision. Again, very, very limited. Hiring managers do not have access to your database except for what has been submitted to them for review. That's a pretty big one. So again, just keep in mind, you've got a hiring manager in your system. It's not somebody you're paying for. It's not somebody that's got access to your system. They can't log in and view all of your candidates, all your jobs, any of that. It's just, look, here's what's been submitted to this person. And here's where there's a little bit of overlap. So standard, sort of full users in your system, they can also act as hiring managers. So this is where, let's say you're in the agency version, and you've got a submittal step in your workflow. At that point, you can submit them to a user within your system, or a user in your system in the HR version, like we're talking about, we're focusing on today. Any user that's in your system can act as a hiring manager. Should almost have like sort of some sort of chart, right? So it's like a full user can act as a hiring manager, but a hiring manager cannot act as a full user. Not sure visually what that looks like. It's not my wheelhouse, but I think you get the idea. Again, any questions, feel free to let us know. All right, so that is enough of the tell. Let me actually show you guys what we're working with here. It's again, it's a lot of sort of hypothetical stuff. I wanted to lay out some bullet points, kind of get a foundation before we start walking through the different steps in the process and what we're talking about. So let's say I am over in Cats, and I'm gonna hop over into my Sales Manager 3 job. And I'm gonna hop down to the pipeline, and I've got a few candidates that I'm working with. And because I always pick on Taylor, we're gonna do that right now. I'm gonna say, all right, so Taylor Johnson, he's a new candidate. And let's just pretend they've gone through my phone screen setup. And at this point, I want to submit them to the hiring manager. We're going to work kind of in reverse here. So I select that status, and then I've got a trigger on this status for submit to hiring manager. If I click that, it's not too different from, let's say, an email trigger that you're setting up through your workflow. I can set a template for what the body is of this email. I can attach their resume plus any other documents that I might want to include there. And we'll take a look at this. There's a couple different ways that you can specify to whom the review is going to be sent. I happen to have this one set up to where it's blank by default. But if I start typing in the name of the hiring manager, we're just going to go with this one. That's where I can specify, okay, for this job, I want it to go to this hiring manager. I can also send it to multiple. So again, when you do that, it's going to say, okay, well, we've sent this review off to multiple hiring managers. What do we need for approval? What do we need approval-wise to sort of move this thing forward? Do we need to just hear from one hiring manager that says yes, or do all hiring managers that this is sent to need to say yes for it to move forward in the process? So again, this sort of dialogue isn't going to pop up until I add multiple hiring managers as part of that submittal. We haven't even dove into the hiring manager, sort of what they see just yet, but this is one of those, as I'm submitting, this is how I'm going to go about doing so. The same, and then I would just hit save, and then that's going to be sent out. The same thing happens when I'm creating a job. So just a quick review. As you're aware, or as you may or may not be aware, the workflow is one of the biggest, best, most customizable things that we have in Cats. Most of the time when it's used is when we talk about here's all the statuses, all the steps that my candidates go through as part of my hiring process. You also have workflow that applies to your jobs. So when a job is new, when it's active, if we close it, if it's been filled, you can set up all these different statuses as well. Specifically, when I create a job, the very first status that I have in my workflow is is what will be applied to that job. And just like I can add triggers to my candidate workflow statuses, I can add triggers to my job statuses, one of which is job approval. And this is basically saying, okay, when I create a job, it's added to the status. And also, we're going to send an email to blank. And again, this can be a standard user within your system, or this can be a hiring manager in your system. And they're going to say, okay, hey, Jeff, heads up, this job requires your approval. To review it, leave feedback, click the link below. And again, this is totally customizable in terms of what you want that to say. So again, triggers are added to your candidate workflow statuses. They're also added to your job workflow statuses so that when that status changes or when that job is created, hiring manager is going to get a heads up. They're going to get an email that says, hey, this thing, this candidate, this job is pending your review. All right, now let's kind of go through the hiring manager experience. Gonna hop over to another window here. So we'll hop back over to the candidate example. Make sure that's coming through. All right, so earlier you saw I had Jeff on there who's submitted. We went through Taylor, but I already took the steps earlier to submit Jeff as a candidate as part of that sales manager position. In doing so, I received an email that says, hey, please consider Jeff for the sales position, to review the candidate, give feedback, approve for interview, follow the link below. That's just what that template says. This can say whatever you want it to say. However, there will be a link below where when they click, it's either going to ask them to log in or it's going to take them right to the page, to the review screen for that particular candidate. In this case, that's what happened. It took me right over to Jeff's sort of resume that's set up here. So I can view the resume, I can view the job description that I have set up. Down here, I can leave some notes. Congratulations, Jeff. You are moving forward to be a sales manager. And then again, I can approve or I can decline. In this case, let's go ahead and approve. And good to go. You approve this person. Here's the notes that I left. If I want to download the resume, that's available at any point for the hiring manager. So we talked earlier about what can they see, what can they not see. Here's the dashboard for a hiring manager. Pretty bare bones, right? But again, that's by design. We're blocking them off from the rest of our database. This is a user that exists just to review jobs and candidates that are sent to them. So if I click the candidates tab, that's going to be a listing of candidates that I have reviewed recently. That can be sorted by status. If I click the jobs tab, same story. Here's a list of jobs that are either pending or that I have made a decision on. And my dashboard is just, sort of a combination of those. Here's candidates that are pending your review. Here's jobs that are pending your review. And we kind of talked about the jobs approval process. It's almost the same exact kind of thing. So as a hiring manager, I'll get an email that says, hey, this job requires your approval. To review it, click the link below. I click that. And there's a little more info here that comes over. These are all going to be specific to what you have set up within your CAT system as far as what fields come over here. We'll for sure look at the description. And again, same idea. I can leave some notes. and I'll click approve. All right, so let's hop back over into CATS. We're going a little bit out of order from the for the layout that I had, but that's fine. So if I hop back over to CATS, a number of things have happened at this point. One, if I go back to my pipeline for that sales manager job, and I take a look at Jeff, I can see that Zach HM, that's just the name I have for that user on here, viewed the submittal, they approved him, and I can also click the little icon here to view the notes that were left by that hiring manager. I'm also going to get an email. So me, as the user that submitted the candidate, I will get an email that says, hey, Jeff was approved, or hey, Jeff was declined. Here's a link over to their profile. So that's automatically going to be logged in the system. You're going to have a link that goes right to that within your system as well. Same thing for the job. So if I hop over into my jobs, what did I have? CFO. I'm going to clear those selected items. Refresh here. Maybe the approval. It's the joys of doing these things live. You're not getting a canned you're not getting a canned sort of presentation here. We're doing these things on the fly, as you can tell. So CFO is in there. If the approval didn't go through, we'll take another look at that. But that's the idea. So that job is going to be moved to active based off of the approval steps that I have set up in my workflow. And this is the sort of the same process that we do when we're talking about candidate submittal too. So as I'm creating these steps, I can say, okay, if the job is approved, this is the next status that I'm going to go ahead and move the job to. Typically, you would see active in a place like that. I won't spend as much time on the job sort of approval as I will with the candidate review approval process. So I'm going to start from scratch here. So I'm going to take the trigger that's in here now. I'm going to completely remove it. And again, we're going to start from scratch. So in my workflow, I have a status right here. It's called submitted to hiring manager. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a trigger by clicking this green plus sign over on the right. In the action dropdown, I'm going to select submit to hiring manager. Now there's a few things that are kind of tricky here. So kind of keep in mind your required statuses. Before, when I changed that status, I had the box that I could check to bring that email preview up. But unless I actually checked that box, the trigger itself wasn't going to fire. That's optional off by default. Optional on by default is similar, except that the box is checked from the get-go. And I can uncheck that box to sort of take that trigger off if I want to. And then required is the box is checked. I can't uncheck it. For me to actually save that status, I have to send that submittal. So that can be as rigid or as flexible as you want it to be. Typically, we recommend one of the optional options here. Based off of if you send it more than you don't, then maybe do on by default. If it's the opposite, go off by default. And you can always go back in later and change that if you want. Now, the reviewer section is one more part that I really wanted to talk about. If you leave this blank as it is now, that's totally fine. And it's going to ask you, as you change that candidate status, okay, to whom do you want to send it? If you want to sort of eliminate that step, if you know that, okay, because this job is assigned to this hiring manager, every time I change a candidate status for this job, I want to send it to that person. That's where I've got this little CATS hiring manager option here. Now, this is kind of funky, and this is something that's not built into the system right away. This is something myself, our support team, whoever you get a hold of, will absolutely walk you through it. If you're a site admin and you're familiar with custom fields, and if you're not, we'll show you. So you go to Settings, Administration, Custom Fields. And what I'm going to do, and let me just flat out delete this one for now. I'm going to add a new custom field. And I'm going to name it Hiring Manager. I'm going to apply this to my jobs. And the field type is going to be user. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to assign a CATS user to a job beyond what's already built into the system. By default, I'm not sure you can do that. I mean, you can with respect to like who the recruiter is, who the owner is on it, but you can't really say like, okay, here's this custom field where I'm just going to assign other CATS users to it. So now we've created that custom field called Hiring Manager. And I'm going to hop back over to that workflow trigger. It didn't save, so we'll start it over, but that's easy enough. So add trigger. Action is going to be submit to hiring manager. And again, if I check the box right here for a hiring manager, that's going to look at the hiring manager that was assigned to that custom field within the job. And it's going to know, oh, because Mike is the hiring manager for this job, automatically I'm going to populate their name into that reviewer spot. It sounds like a little thing, but if this is something you're repeating time after time after time, it's those little steps that can save you clicks along the way that are going to end up saving you, quite a bit of time in the long run. So kind of keep that in mind. You can either type in a name there, and that way, no matter what job, it's always going to have that person in there. I can leave it blank, and I can choose the hiring manager on the fly, or I can create a custom user field on my jobs. And if I check this box, it's going to look at if I have someone assigned to that custom user field, it's going to include them as the reviewer. When we're looking at the body of the email that goes out, this is where a lot of people will sort of create almost like custom submittal templates, cards, what have you, as part of that submittal process. What the hiring manager views by default is pretty limited, right? They click the link, they can view the resume, they can leave some notes. But the body of that email that goes out can contain any of this stuff that's over here on the right. So any fields, be it standard, be it custom, can be included in the email that goes out as part of that submittal process. So if you've got a field that says, whatever, here's their favorite color, here's their salary expectations, here's their experience with this coding technology, whatever, include that in a field within the candidate's profile, And it's easy to just click and drag those fields over into the body of that email. And again, you can kind of go nuts formatting this, including whichever information you would want to include that goes through. And then the last thing I wanted to show you guys was down here at the bottom. So I've got an approved status and I've got a declined status. So if you remember when I showed you before, Hiring Manager has that information and they have an approve or a decline button. This is where a little more automation starts to take place. So I can say, all right, if the hiring manager approves, here's the status that I'm going to set them to. First interview, second interview. If the hiring manager declines, it's going to be a no-go. Let's go ahead and set them to, not in consideration. Or maybe I've got, what appears sort of in this dropdown or as options here is what's going to be out here. So all of my statuses that I have built out in my workflow are going to appear as options in that space. So let's say candidate approves, it's going to send them to first interview, at which point it's going to send out an email to the recruiter. It's going to send out an email to the candidate that says, hey, you've been approved. Let's set something up for next steps. Maybe it's the opposite, right? Hiring manager declines. Automatically, we're going to put them in not in consideration. On that particular status is an email that sends a rejection letter, and maybe that's, the next day at 9 a.m. Who knows? You can send it right away. You can set that on a delay. It's up to you. But again, that's where you really start digging into the workflow. You've got all kinds of customization, all kinds of options that you can do that are going to pertain to your workflow, to your specific hiring process. All right, let me go back over my notes. Yep. Okay, cool. I think that just about covers like the presentation part of things. Jeff and I are absolutely here to answer your questions. I'm going to pause for just a moment. And again, kind of smaller crowd today, so I'm sure we'll be able to get all your questions answered. And I will hop on in just a moment. And Jeff, unless there's any details on your side that you think I'm forgetting, we'll pause and we'll start answering questions here in just a moment. All right, cool. So a few questions coming in. So again, had a question almost off the bat, just wanted to reiterate. As far as adding those hiring manager users within your system, it is for HR CATS customers only. So if the hiring that you're doing is internal, it's direct hires, it's for your company, this is something you're going to have access to. And easiest way to check that version is just look over here on the left. If it's just jobs and candidates, right? So if I don't have contacts, if I don't have companies, that's how you know. Otherwise, again, just click on user management up here. And if you're HR, you should see the ability to add hiring manager. If not, then you're not. So couple easy ways to check there. Let's see. Yeah, there was, Robin had a question. At one point, those who've been with CATS for a while know we've gone through a couple different iterations of this. one of which was you're able to add hiring managers at a certain price per hiring manager. There are a few sites that have been sort of grandfathered into that. So, if that's the case, you're actually getting a cheaper deal than what's now, because it sort of ends up being full user is X amount, based on your subscription, and then it's you get 5 hiring managers, whereas adding them for $10 each. But that's been phased out as of a few years ago. Again, if there's any questions on what plan you're on pricing wise, hit that support icon and just reach out to support, and we can answer those questions for you specifically. But the vast majority of folks at this point are just on the 5 hiring managers per full user within the system. Yeah, Colleen had a question. Basically, once the hiring manager makes the decision, that's it. There's not a way to go back into that candidate record and change what the decision is. What you would want to do in that scenario, so if I'm a full user within the system, if I'm the hiring manager, I want to reach out to the person that submitted that record to me and say, hey, I clicked the wrong button or I changed my mind, right? Can we resubmit? Can we go through that again? At which point, let's say I wanted to resubmit Jeff here. What I could do, I'm gonna hop in, I'm gonna change their status to something before that. So maybe I just change it back over to phone screen and I'll hit save. And then I'm just gonna hit phone screen or their status, and I'm gonna set it to submit it to hiring manager again. And then again, trigger's gone at this point. But click the trigger to send that out, and then that's gonna go through another submittal process. So that's one where, again, can't change it once the decision's been made, but certainly you can just move that candidate back and then resubmit them and gather new feedback, that type of thing. Yeah, and the other question that came through with Colleen as well was, in your workflow, you're not held to just one submit to hiring manager trigger. You can add as many as you would like. So, we've had it set up to where, okay, on this one, I'm going to add a submit to hiring manager, and we'll just leave it like that for now. And let's say on first interview, that's also going to have a submit to hiring manager trigger. And I could, start making the dominoes fall where I say, okay, on this submit to hiring manager trigger, if the candidate or if the reviewer approves, I'm going to move them to that status that I have called first interview. Then automatically, boom, reviewer says, yep, we're going to move them over to first interview. And that on its own, assuming we have this second trigger set, either to required or on by default, that's going to set off a second review based on that status. So that's where you can do, again, this person approved. Because this person approved, I'm automatically going to send it to this next person, and that triggers a review, and then you can go around the horn as long as you'd like with making those that sort of chain of reviews happen. Very good question. Let's see. So Alicia had a question. Can a hiring manager have their calendar integrated into CATS? Unfortunately, they can't. Again, very, very, very basic as far as what the hiring manager can and can't do in the system. They exist just to sort of review things that were sent to them. So they don't have, where'd my hiring manager view go? So again, as a hiring manager, this is my whole thing. This is CATS for me. Here's jobs that are pending your approval. Here's candidates that are pending your approval. Here's the jobs you've made decisions on. Here's the candidates you've made decisions on. If I want to go in and change like the language that it's in, time zones, things like that, that's about it. So yeah, again, by design, a very, very, very basic setup functionality wise for those users. All right, I think that just about covers it. If there's any other questions, feel free to send those in. Otherwise, I'm just gonna do what I always do at the end here. I wanna make sure that everyone is fully aware of how to reach out to us. So again, within CATS, if you're not yet, please familiarize yourself with the options here when you hit the question mark. Our knowledge base is really, really good. There are guides specifically on what we've talked about today. So, again, here's, okay, I'm a hiring manager. Now what do I do? Here's kind of a guide for those folks that say, all right, here's the pages that you can see. Here's some of the stuff that you can do. All the things I talked about where I'm like, okay, let's submit a candidate to a client or a hiring manager. All those steps I flew through where we're talking about the workflow, the submittal process, adding like that custom user to my jobs, that's all broken down here. So again, there's some really, really good resources that we have online. I don't hop on these webinars unless there's online resources that I can refer to as well that you guys can always follow back with. But by all means, rather, if you have any specific questions, emailing support is the best way to do it. The option's right there. And Jack, Emily, myself, Jeff, we're happy to get you the answers that you're looking for. All right, I think that's going to do it for today. Again, keep an eye on future webinars in our knowledge base. Once again, there's actually a link for upcoming webinars. Searching is what we're going to handle next month. Not really necessarily searching within CATS, but I think we're going to narrow in on Boolean searching. I know I've talked to a lot of you guys over the last few months, and that's sort of a thing that I've figured out that people want to learn a little bit more about. So that's absolutely what we're going to cover in March. I said it on the webinar, so now I'm committed to it. So, all right, guys. Again, recording of this is coming your way in about 24 hours. This will be up on YouTube by the end of the week. And I hope to see you again next month. Thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye.